About a decade ago, when I was working towards my doctorate, I went to see a bishop, the Bishop of Gibraltar in Europe, an Anglican who ministers to the Anglican and Episcopal churches outside these nations, but still under the authority of the Church of England. I went to see him because I wanted his help in getting access to some archives in Rome. Despite being an Anglican bishop, he was incredibly well connected with the Roman Catholic Church, and some letters from him got me an introduction to the person who could get me into the Vatican's secret archives. Now, he was very friendly and helpful, but he didn't believe in brief conversations. And although I turned up to a meeting really just to ask about a letter of introduction, we had a long conversation about the relationships between the Church of England and the Anglican Communion and the Roman Catholic Church. And he mentioned that recently there had been a report published by the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission called Mary, Grace and Hope in Christ. This was an agreed statement of theologians from both churches coming together to say what they held in common and what those points of difference were in the different churches' beliefs about Mary. This had then gone to the General Synod of the Church of England to be debated and received. And the bishop told me that he'd expected some areas to be controversial, highlighting the gaps between those things which some Anglicans have received and believed about Mary, some things which Anglicans are free to accept or reject in Catholic teaching about Mary, those things which historically the Church of England has been very cautious about saying about the nature of Mary's relationship with God, and those areas of belief which Roman Catholics have decided have a particular authority for them within the teaching of their church. He knew that was coming, those moments of conflict around the differences between really how the Church of England and the Anglican Communion and how the Roman Catholic Church thinks of Mary, but also how we think of authority and where we draw our inspiration and our knowledge of God for and from. But he was surprised at the depths of negative comments within the General Synod debate about one particular issue, that the report refers to Mary as the Blessed Virgin. And he said he was particularly awestruck by those members of the Church of England who, coming from a much more biblically literalist and literate direction, objected to this phrase. And over again he repeated to me, as he had done in the debate in General Synod, this is how she's described in Scripture. She is blessed in the words which Luke uses to describe her. When Mary goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, Elizabeth greets her with the words, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." And she then says, "Blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." And Mary, in her song, the words of which we had as our gospel reading just now, names herself as blessed. She says she will be called this, rather than anything else, in the voices of all generations, because of God's actions in and on her life. She is blessed, and Orthodox Christianity still refers to Mary as ever blessed, just to emphasize this fact, that she carries God hidden within her own body, within her own womb. But that pregnancy is not the real focus of the Magnificat, and is not the only kind of blessing that she has received. It's not really the form and focus of her song. With God growing within her own body, she is able to sing out with a unique insight, a song of mercy for those who fear God, a song of God's strength, a song which calls for the downfall of the proud and the powerful, and which offers hope to the humble and promises food to the hungry, and is a fulfillment of God's enduring care for his people who are Abraham's children. Understanding Mary to be blessed because of the way she sings of these hopes, because the life that is kindled within her womb kindles within her this understanding of her blessing, is tremendously important to Luke's gospel. Because Luke gives two roles to Mary within his telling of her song. That she becomes the representative of all those who are receiving these blessings from God, of the lowly being raised up, of the hungry being fed, of Israel being set free. In this way, Luke imagines her giving voice to a song of power that echoes throughout the world over the next 2,000 years on behalf of the voiceless, including, it must be said, all the voiceless of her own sex. Because in her song, Mary bears the hopes of generation upon generation of those women's voices that weren't recorded or reflected in the Holy Scriptures. Mary's song mentions Abraham and his children, but it is also symbolic of the silenced voices of Sarah and Rachel and Leah and Rebecca, those matriarchs of Israel whose voices don't really appear within our Holy Scriptures. And also of Miriam too, which Exodus has an enormously important role for, and yet whose voice is not recorded there. Mary's song also draws very heavily on the song of Hannah, that likewise celebrates God's intervention among those who are outside the social forms of power and articulacy, among those who are voiceless because of age and because of sex. Luke also makes Mary, in this song, the reviver and the reinterpreter in the words that she is given of the very vocal traditions of male prophets throughout the Hebrew Bible. That's why there are so many resonances between her song and the words of Isaiah, the man who called God's people to justice and to peace and to a fuller appreciation of what those words mean in the Hebrew Bible. Mary is called blessed, both because she receives God's everlasting, eternal, begotten word in the person of Jesus Christ, the child that she will bear. And she is called blessed because she, in song, is both the lowly one to whom Christ comes and the prophet of God who foretells his coming and foretells his favor toward the lowly. Here at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, here in our meetings of the Parochial Church Council, we've been talking over the last 6 months or so about Mary's song and finding in the words of the Magnificat an inspiration and a jumping off point for our discussions about the priorities of our church community over the next year, what the diocese asks us to refer to as our mission action plan. Reading the words of Mary's song, we've asked ourselves over and over again and explored in small group discussions how we might be able to continue, like Mary, to be better receivers of God's blessing, how we can be more aware of what we have received at God's hand, how we can find in the knowledge that things over 1,000 years have flourished in this holy place, a sign of God's love for the just resolution of the needs of the poor and the lowly. We've also focused on how we might better as a church community become aware of the voices that we don't ordinarily co-opt into our discussions, so that they are not reduced or silenced, they are not somehow downsized as part of our vulnerability around reopening our church community to life in this pandemic-ridden world. And how we might be more aware of what those voices can teach all of us when they are allowed to speak wild and free and true of the church's future, a future that's more marked with justice and a radical vision of peace as we emerge from the pandemic. The PCC and I together have been exploring how these massive themes, these prophetic insights of Mary's song, bring love and justice together. But we don't seek in those deliberations to become a voice for the voiceless, but instead to open our church, to open its councils and its leadership so that there is space there for multiple voices, so that there is invitation there to allow the songs that are traditionally unheard to shape from the traditions of the prophets the future of this church community. Through this exercise, through this mission action plan, and through all we seek to do for the future of this particular Church of St. Mary the Virgin, through meditating on Mary's song in our meetings and again this morning, we become more aware of how we have been blessed as members of this church, as receivers of the blessings that Mary received, signs of inclusivity and justice, welcome, commitment, and care. And we also receive a challenge to follow Mary's understanding and articulation of what it is to be blessed, being more aware of the challenges and opportunities to deepen the signs of inclusivity and welcome, commitment and care, so that all those who are called to receive from God a blessing, and all those who are called by God to show practical and prophetic signs of his mercy and strength in our community, will gather together under the patronage of Mary, who we truly can understand to be ever blessed, because her example blesses us here today and in the future.